Chris want to do another shirt. Chris want to do another shirt. Move that to the shutter speed. Okay. We're going to do a shirt for the depth of field. What is the depth of field? You ain't got to say it exactly, but what is the depth of field? Show of hands. Who want to take a stab at it? Go ahead.
You say I don't have to say it.
You ain't got to say it exact. Just be in the ballpark.
Oh, dang. Okay. So it's like the amount of space in front and behind your subject.
That's what?
That's what?
Yeah, that's what? But I'm saying the amount of, that's in front and behind, that's what? Somebody can steal now. She got you there.
The focus.
There you go. There you go. What size? Small. Small. Okay, small. There you go. There you go, man. Thank you. Thank you. Shutter speed. Shutter speed. Shutter speed is a device that administers exposure by limiting the time over which light is admitted. That's the shutter speed is a part of the camera. It's a shutter. The shutter. Matter of fact, when you take a picture, it's like when you hit the camera mirror is flipping up out the way so that the shutter can open, then close, then the mirror flip back down. That's what that noise is you hearing. That's the mirror flipping out of the way so that because if you open up your camera, and I don't advise nobody to open up their camera, and you look, that's not the shutter there. That's the mirror. Like if you flip it up, you can see like some little curtains. I don't know if you can see it, but it's like some little gray curtains in the back there. Your shutter is behind, that's the shutter. That's what opens and exposes the sensor. That's your shutter, them little curtains back there. And that opens up and closes at a different rate of speed depending on how you got it set. And again, I like to compare it to the eye. It works like your eyelid. Last time we did a little exercise where we had everybody close their eyes and open it. But if you close your eyes and then open them slow and close them again, that's simulating a slow shutter speed. And when you do that, you let a whole lot more light in. If you close your eyes and you open them and close them again real fast, that's simulating a fast shutter speed, and you're letting a whole lot less light in when you do that. It's like you don't see as much. And that's the same thing that the camera does when it wants to let less light in. You raise that shutter speed up. If you want to let more light in, you lower that shutter speed, slowing it down. And I know sometimes when I say it, I might say a fast shutter speed because I program myself to think faster. Like if I say you need a fast shutter speed, I'm saying like raise it up, make your number be like 640, 800, 1000, the denominator. We're gonna get into that on the next slide. And like I say, it controls how much light is coming in, and it controls the motion blur. Now, what is motion blur? You have two kinds of blur. You got camera shake and you got motion blur. Camera shake is just from when you moving your camera, when you taking the picture, and it'll make the picture slightly blurry. You ever took a picture and it just looked a little bit out of focus, and you know you had the focus locked in, your shutter speed probably had dropped down really low, and when you took the picture, you couldn't keep it steady. And so it just be a little bit soft or a little bit, that's camera shake. The only way around that is to raise your shutter speed, because ideally you don't want your shutter speed to drop no lower than 1/50, because they say that's pretty much the slowest that most people can hold a camera and take a picture and not introduce motion blur. Now, if you got super steady hands, you can drop it as low as you want. Or if you got a lens with image stabilization, it kind of helps you. They tell you have a lens, it might let you cheat the system by 2 stops or 3 stops. That means you can lower the shutter speed like 2 stops slower than what's the recommended. And the recommended is, I got it on a slide somewhere, it's typically double whatever your focal length is. So if you're shooting at 50 millimeters with video and photos, like if your focal length is 50, you don't want to be shooting no less than 1/100. That's more so with photography, but it works kind of the same way with video, but it's off on the frame rate. We're going to talk about that too. But if you're shooting at 100 millimeters, you typically don't want your shutter speed to be slower than 1/200 because that's the rule of thumb. But if you got a lens with image stabilization, if they say you can get 2 stops of light, that means you can lower it 2 stops lower than 1/200. So if you're at 1/200, you cut it in half, that's 1/100. You cut it in half, that's 1/50. That's 2 stops. So that theoretically, if they selling you a lens that they say you can get 2 stops, you should be able to hand hold it at 1/50 and still not get camera shake. But most time they inflate their numbers, and so you buy that lens. So I typically try not to go less than 1 stop. What is motion blur? Motion blur is the apparent streaking of the subject in the picture. It's the apparent streaking. Like when you take a picture and you can see that they're moving, that's motion blur. That's what motion blur is. I got a picture to show. Let me get into don't want to do that. Need my mouse. Okay, let's get into this with some football players. Okay, if you see this picture here, I shot this at 1/160th of a second. And if you look at his hand, you can tell he's moving his hand. You can tell he's doing something like this because he's sharp. The guy standing next to him that's still is sharp, but his hand look like it's moving. That's motion blur. It's like the apparent motion or the apparent streaking in the picture. And if you want that blur, just you start to slow your shutter down a little bit. If you don't want that blur, you bump it up. Because if you look at this picture here, I shot this at 1/640th. And you know he's running with that football, but he don't look like he's streaking because I shot it at 1/640th of a second, which was, for football, it's kind of slow, but you just you got to play, because some of them I shot at 1/800 that night. Some of it I shot at 1/640th. And if he would have been running a little faster, it may have been a little bit of blur in there. And you just have to play with it to know what you're shooting if you want to freeze that action. Whenever you hear somebody say freeze an action, that's controlled by your shutter speed. When they say freeze action, that means you don't want to see the motion blur. Like if you ever took a picture of like that waterfall the water fountain downtown, and you're taking a picture and it's on a sunny day, and you take the picture and you want the water to look like it's flowing, and you just got a whole bunch of dots. It's like it's just a bunch of dots. That's because it's so bright and your shutter speed is probably bumped up way high, and so you're not getting that silky look of the water. You're just getting a bunch of dots coming out. That's why you're getting them dots, because it's freezing that action because the shutter speed is so high, because it's really bright outside. And one way you can combat that is if you raise up your aperture, go up to a higher aperture, that's going to cut down on the amount of light that's needed, so you can start to slow that shutter down and let that light back in to get that motion. Other than that, you can get into some advanced stuff like using ND filters, but we ain't gonna get into all of that today. And like I was saying before, when sometimes you hear me say a faster shutter, it's because if you look here, when you go, can everybody see that? When you go higher, like 1/25th, 1/250th, 1/500, it's a faster shutter. That means the shutter staying open for a less amount of time. When you hit it, when you take a picture, it start to sound faster. Let me see if I got it on video. Let me put it on picture. Slow this down. Do like 1/15th. Can everybody hear this? Hold on. You heard that? And then if I go bump this up, this is like 1/16th, 1/2000th. See how it sounds faster? And slow it down. It's like that. You're going to get more motion blur with that, but you're going to freeze them like the football player. The faster it is, you're stopping that motion. Okay. Any questions on the shutter speed, motion blur? Yep. Any questions on the shutter speed, motion blur? How to freeze motion, let motion in? Yes.
What does the M stand for in the first place?
I'm shooting in manual mode. That's what it means. Like if I change it right there, if I change, it says AV. I'm shooting at aperture priority right now. If I change it to this right here, I'm shooting at shutter priority right now. TV. Remember I tell you time value on Canons? That's the mode that I'm shooting in. And that's shooting in and everything that we're going over is giving you the ability to be able to shoot in manual mode. Because when you shoot in manual mode, you're telling the camera, I want to pick my shutter speed, I want to pick my aperture, and unless you got your ISO in automatic, I want to pick my ISO too. Because if you're leaving it automatic, the camera, even if you're in manual mode, you can still put your ISO in automatic. But if you really want to control it, you can control all three in manual mode. And the AV aperture priority, you're telling the camera, I want to adjust my aperture and you do the rest. Unless you got that, like how I got that in auto, it's going to do the rest. But if I change that, if I say I want to control them too, and it's going to pick my shutter speed. If you're in shutter priority, you telling the camera, I want to pick my shutter speed and you pick my aperture. And then if I put the ISO on auto, you pick the ISO too. So the aperture priority means I just want to control the aperture. The shutter priority means I just want to control the shutter. And manual mode means I want to control everything. Got it? That's a good question. Any questions on the shutter speed before we move on to ISO? Anybody need a break? We good on both on? Okay.